peoples come to work, so my peoples come first. I got worldwide family all over the earth, and I worry about them all for whatever it's worth.
Will is the founder and runs an organization called Grassroots Economics. What's amazing about Grassroots Economics and Will Ruddock? Well, he is responsible for the community currency in the world. They have hundreds of thousands of transactions on the blockchain. They're working with tens of thousands of end users in Kenya presently. And he has a solution that has not only real world application and real world partners like the World Food Program and the Red Cross, but also the capacity to be able to bring private equity investment into this ecosystem and to scale the capacity of community currencies to be accessible not only to those in the developing world, but to any of us who are in need of credit. So Will, thank you so much for joining us today. It's really an honor. And so could you introduce yourself and then we can move over to your screen share.
Sure. Hey guys, thanks for the beautiful introduction, and also thanks Gus for mentioning all this stuff. Well, I've been doing this kind of work now for about 12 years in Kenya, and almost 20 years altogether, kind of, coming up to Kenya. And I think it's just an exciting time right now, as Gus mentioned, because of the recession stuff going on, but also because of all the technology. And I feel like, these two are sort of meeting at a really crux moment right now for humanity. And it's really empowering to see what some of this technology can do and how it can sort of decentralize and create sustainable structures. So I was a physicist. I eventually got into what was called econophysics at the time, and basically got into economics. I started working on Forex hedge funds, and I'd always been really drawn to activism, and I ended up going to the Peace Corps. But in between that, I started studying these community currencies, and I just thought the idea was immensely interesting. Like, how do we give people the ability to create their own credit structures, their own value systems? How do we even link those together? How are they linked together now in the Forex market? And what would that mean to create, sustainable ecosystems? And so I came to Kenya with the Peace Corps as a volunteer. I was a teacher here, and I found huge communities where there's a lot of excess capacity, and there's lots of, sort of idle capacity that people need, but there's just no medium of exchange. At least there's crunches all the time, where that medium of exchange is being stored as a store of long-term value at best, or it just doesn't even exist in some seasons. So, that the problem that community currencies were sort of supposed to deal with actually exists in chronic reality in Kenya and more so all over the world. And so yeah, why don't I do a screen share there, or and get into a little bit of a
yeah, absolutely. Will. So I think there's looks like there's two Will Ruddocks here that we have on the panelist list. Is the one I'm talking to now, you Will, are you able to share your screen? If not, then I have your presentation and I can share that for you. I think you will be able to do it now. So just take a quick look on your control panel, and I think you should be able to share it as well as your camera. Great. Thanks so much. Hey, Will, it seems like you are on mute. But we do see your screen. Thanks for being with us. Yeah, okay, wonderful. Right. Great to see your face. Hi, Will.
Okay, great. All right, now we're here. Can you see that?
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks. Great. Okay, so sorry for that. So Grassroots Economics, Caroline Dama and I started this. We started doing the work about 10 years ago, and we incorporated, I think, about 5 years ago into a foundation And Sarafu became the name for the network we built when we started developing these currencies. And so we started doing them on paper, security printing paper. I could write a whole book about it. It's not easy to even get into the country. It's hard to print. They're expensive. You know, to try to make them unforgeable is quite hard. So it's a nice natural story for where blockchain kind of comes in and saying, well, how do we create even the medium itself, right? You know, what are the bits floating around? How do we make them, you know, trustless in a way? And basically the problem that we sort of came up with in Kenya, it was more about saying, look, there's a lot of excess capacity there. The problem is there aren't really markets. There aren't really very sustainable food systems. All the food is being conglomerated and shipped off to Europe or something. And, you know, there's food coming back into the country every year. I think we ship out $4 billion of food out of Kenya every year, and we get something like, you know, 300 million, is probably much more right now, in food aid back into the country. You know, the systems here are really chronically broken. And local economies are the sort of the brunt of it. So we sort of equated that equation to sort of say, well, how do we incentivize local production and consumption? And so I was a super big advocate of community currencies. I really believed that there was a concept there that was worth trying. And I had done a lot of this, you know, research in Europe and US with systems that have been around for a very long time. And then this part kind of came in, and you know, the thing with just this alone was that local production and consumption only really exists in a natural equilibrium in some sort of kind of island state, right? There has to be some way to sort of inject into and out of those communities. Like, communities all work and they thrive with each other. And so we got into building many community currencies all around each other and coming up with exchange rates of these paper notes and whatnot. We first started doing a digital system in 2015 using feature phones like USSD systems. And we were using databases behind that. And even with the databases that are tracking these currencies, you would say, well, how do we create an exchange rate between this currency and that currency over there, right? How do we do that in a really natural way? And then I guess about 2.5 years ago now, we came across the Bancor protocol and the Bancor Foundation in Israel. And they have this beautiful equation, you know, made by A.L. Herzog that creates a bonding between currencies. And it could be any currencies. And you can choose how you want those currencies to be bonded. So essentially what it did was it says, well, can one currency kind of act as sort of a shareholding for another currency? And we would call that other currency a reserve. So investment in this case is investment between communities. You know, there's export and import, but it's also investment in terms of taking stores of value and locking it in to local production and consumption and incentivizing all three of these things at the same time. So I think that has been a really important sort of lesson for us. So community inclusion currencies, the inclusion part came when we started working more and more with Red Cross. It was originally going to be refugee inclusion community currencies. And we kind of shortened it to this. And we've had a really good time in this last year, almost 2 years, working with Red Cross, kind of preparing these pilots and working with Red Cross to roll these systems out. And when Corona hit in April here, we had a team in Mukuru in Nairobi, and within 3 days, we had enrolled 5,000 businesses within that community. And it just, the uptake was just huge. And basically it was people going around and saying, look, there's this thing, Corona, you've got to wear masks, you got to wash your hands. And if you need to buy soap, take these tokens and go buy them over there, okay? And then the soap lady would go and buy, sanitary towels for her daughter, right? And the person selling sanitary towels would go and get a haircut from somebody else. And basically the idea was to build these little networks of trade that sustain each other and can form local economies and help sustain local markets, but at the same time say, how do we make those investable? And so the idea with CIC was basically to say, so organizations, community groups, they develop a CIC as a voucher in a sense, they back it with their goods and services. Donors and investors can contribute asset backing to reserve shares. And basically they create CICs as their shares. And that's what the communities are essentially using. So we basically turned a share structure, a bonded instrument that bonds reserve in the form of donor funds or impact investment to a credit, right? And that credit is being used, those shares are acting as a credit, and they're being used as a medium of exchange, but they can also be liquidated. So there ends up being two markets, essentially. There's the local market of trade and committed goods, and the communities themselves, they're really signing a contract with the local chief and administration that these are their vouchers. They're actually backing them with their goods and services. So to me, this is, you're basically creating an index here for what is actually being traded on the ground and looking at all the trades that are going around that. And we'll get more into indexing in a minute here. But so yeah, they're CIC-based tokens. We're in the process of moving to Bloxburg right now, which is the safest layer 2 blockchain we could find. And all of the economic impact is auditable, right? So you can do returns on investment, SDGs, ESGs, social returns on investment. Like, there's a lot of blockchain projects looking at things like IXO, for instance, in terms of validating data. And in our case, we just have a lot of data, and we're sort of almost catching up on that end. So building these indexes around this data, it becomes quite interesting, and we'll get a little bit more into that. So this is just the general cycle, and I'll try to speed up a little bit here because I know I don't have much time. But so we start with donors or investors, and these can actually come from the communities themselves. But in our work with Red Cross, for instance, we're using funds, for instance, dedicated for cash transfer funding. Cash transfer funding is when money is essentially airdropped over a community, and so we're basically saying, well, instead of that, take your donor funds and let's create a contract on a blockchain, and that contract is going to lock those donor funds into a credit. Okay, into a share structure, if you will. And I'll kind of go back and forth on that because it's a little bit of both. So a community says, we are backing this credit, it's our voucher with our goods and services, and it's collateralized by this reserve, okay? And so this is one contract that basically holds both of these things. And again, this is all based on the Bancor protocols and contract suites, which have seen over $1 billion of trade. And those in networks that have been going on for a very, very, they've been very much tested, let's just say, in the world of blockchain. And so we're quite happy with the contracts. So they've got these tokens, they can use them. So they use them for goods and for trade, for circulation, but they're also using them as a way of planning into the future, right? What are our budgets? What are we trying to do in this community? Are we trying to do community farming? Are we trying to build schools? What are we actually planning as a community? And there's a real beautiful process culturally around that. And a lot of our work has been to fit these tools as if they were, a drum set into the vernacular of that community, right? Like to basically say, okay, here's a financial instrument, and these guys are, these women groups are amazing. They have a dozen financial instruments they're already using with actual lockboxes and things like this. They do really cool finance. And so that's been a nice thing for us in a way to integrate into these communities that say, oh, okay, we can see the usage of this tool, essentially. These are essentially shares against our future production, right? We're backing them with our commitments, and they're collateralized, okay? And so because they're collateralized, it means that they can be liquidated, okay? So when they can be liquidated, we pass channels right through M-Pesa, so there's a huge amount of e-money systems in Kenya, right? That money basically comes right out of the reserve, and what that does is it decreases the exchange value. And as it decreases the exchange value, it creates an investment or a utility to buy into those communities as well. Basically to say, look, if I want to buy any of these products or services on offer, I can increase the value of the exchange rate by adding money into this and minting additional tokens. Okay, so once the contract's been sealed, the only way to create or destroy tokens is through this contract that's kind of in between these two steps here. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, but I just, like the potential impact here, I think, is really vast. The implications for, sustainable food systems and just allowing people to create investable credit. To me, there's at least 1 billion potential users that are looking for credit access. I mean, World Bank right now is quoting, upteens of, $3 or $4 trillion of missing credit in the world for in terms of the demand. So if there's a system that we can decentralize credit issuance in a safe way, right, where we can actually see what's behind that credit at any moment with transparent blockchain contracts, to me, this is also the future of fractional reserve. In terms of banking, what's behind your bank credit? What's behind Wells Fargo credit? Exactly. At that second, at that instantaneous moment, it's not easy to say. So, yeah, transparent blockchain contracts, proof of impact and sustainable, supply chain tracking, I think is a really huge aspect of this, especially when we're working with Red Cross, for instance. I mean, so far we've seen something like at least a 20x multiplier on increased trade volume in those communities. Just this year alone, basically since Corona hit, we've seen about $1.5 million traded among about 37,000 users.
So,
Indexed,
Will,
yeah.
Will, thanks so much. We briefly, right at the end of our time here. Your work is absolutely inspiring. I got a bunch of questions here in the chat saying, where can I find this presentation? Where can I find out more about Will's project? If you could drop us a link, Will, to to your website, and also we'll be, if it's okay with you, Will, we'd love to be able to share your presentation in our package of documents, which we'll be putting together.
No I think you've got the.
So, Will, in the last 30 seconds here, what do you need? If this of course, we're recording this and we'll be sending this out over our YouTube, so there'll be many more thousands of viewers after this. If people are inspired by your work, how can they get involved, and what do you really need right now? If you can sort of crunch that down into 30 seconds.
Sure. Yeah. Sorry for bad timing there. So, yeah. So basically, we're trying to build infrastructure to build this kind of first sustainability index based on real economics, and there's a huge amount to do there. And pole pole is Swahili. It means slowly, slowly, but it also means kind of take care and take time. And we've kind of done that. I mean, this is sort of a 12-year journey now, and we're sort of in the midst of, having a wonderful team in terms of blockchain and field teams and all of our software. And so we're in that sort of transition stage of saying, okay, which blockchain are we going to use for this? Let's take our time, and all that stuff. So the biggest thing right now is there's donations right now. We're surviving on donations. We want to do an ICO with sort of a catalyst token for this that's going to be used in the ecosystem.
Yep.
We're looking for advice and of course partnership. Like how do we build those ecosystems more and more? It's way faster to do it with other people than alone, of course. So thank you guys so much. Yeah.
Thanks, Will.